forced to take a unit activation. In order to do this, I simply say I'm taking a unit activation. That makes the unit pool my active pool. So all the action is going to be going from my unit pool to my monster pool at this point. So Dylan, I'm taking my unit activation, and the first phase of a unit activation is the spawn phase. You'll notice on this map that there are 5 points that look similar, or look the exact same, right here on my side of the board. They're outlined in blue, Dylan's are outlined in red, they have the hazard stripes on them, and this is where I can spawn units. Now note that you can only spawn a unit once on a spawn point. So the maximum number of units that I can spawn on this unit activation is going to be 5. I've got 5 spawn points that I can fill up. And so I'm going to do that. I'll spend 1 action die, and when I say spend, what happens is I take the action die and move it across the board and place it in my monster pool. Once I've paid the cost, I can deploy 1 unit. You'll notice that in the bottom corner of your units, there's a little coin symbol with a number on it. Now your grunt units are almost always going to be 1 cost. That means you spend 1 action die to deploy them. And your elite units are going to be 2 cost. So you have to spend an extra action die to get the elite unit out. So I spent 1 action die, and I'm going to deploy a Scorcher. This is a basic grunt unit, and I can choose from any of 5 of these spawn points. And this one looks good right here. So I've deployed 1 Scorcher. Still my turn until I pass it, and so I'll pay another action die, and I'll deploy another Scorcher up here a little further into my opponent. I'm going to pay another action die and deploy a Chomper, which is another basic grunt unit. Pay another 1 and deploy an Explodohawk, one of my favorite units, also a basic grunt. And then I'm going to pay 1 more and spawn, let's see, how about a Destructomite here in the corner of the map. So I've spawned 5 units. Now, one thing to note real quick is that during your spawn phase, you can pay 1 action die to move a unit on your spawn point off of your spawn point in any of the adjacent squares. This applies to your enemy's units as well. So, if I wanted to move this Explodohawk, I can pay 1, move the Explodohawk, and free that spawn point up. Now that said, I've already spawned a unit on the spawn point,
so I can't use it again. And now this actually makes the bump illegal. And here's why. In order to bump a unit, I must then spawn a unit on that spawn zone. So if I cannot spawn a unit on the newly freed spawn zone, I cannot pay the 1 to bump. Anytime I want to bump, I have to pay 1 to bump, then I have to pay 1 to spawn right where I bump the unit off. Now I can't do that right now because I've already spawned on that spawn zone. So I can't bump, and I'm actually done with my spawn phase. After the spawn phase is my advancement phase.
And before we move, let's look at a few things on this map. First thing you'll notice is these bright red circles, and these are known as power zones. These are going to be very important for later whenever you're trying to get your monster power so that he can do attacks. Now the power zones are considered yours if you have a unit occupying them, and this is going to be a very big advantage. If you occupy a power zone, you're going to get more power dice later on in the game. So that's something to think about on the first turn whenever you're moving into position. Something else is the big purple X. Now that is a negative power zone, or a negative zone. And what this does is it's going to take power away from your opponent's monster if you're occupying it. So that's another thing you want to keep in mind. Third, you have these neutral spawn points. You'll see the green with the diamond activator. Now what this is you can't use it unless you have a unit occupying that activator. Now if a unit here is occupying that activator, I can now spawn units in this spawn point. Same rules still apply, but now this is considered my spawn point and I can use it. That's something else to keep in mind. Another thing that you'll notice is that some of these units are flying units, which is noted by the wings on the right side of the unit, and some of them are not flying units, which means they don't have the wings. Now, whenever you're securing something, which is anything that I just described, a power zone, a negative zone, or the activator on a neutral spawn point, units with flying generally do not count as securing those points. So that's just something to keep in mind. We'll go over that a little bit later, but flying units cannot hold power zones, negative zones, and neutral spawn points. So I'm going to go ahead and pay 1 to move my chomper, and whenever I'm moving, I can move one diagonal space, and then I have to move in straight lines. And I can move the total number described in the top left corner with the arrow that says a number in it, and my number here is 5. So I can move a total of 5 spaces. I will count it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. Looks like the nearest power zone I might go to is this one here. But I've also got to keep in mind that you can secure buildings, and this is another very important part of Monsterpocalypse. Let me go over this for you. If I have a building here, any building, if at any time I have 3 units adjacent to it, that building is considered secured. It has to be 3 of my units adjacent to the building with no enemy units adjacent. So if one of Dylan's units was anywhere around this building, I would no longer consider that building secured. This is something else that's going to come in handy whenever we get to our monster activation. We'll go over that. But securing buildings is another very important part of Monsterpocalypse, and when you secure buildings, you get certain abilities granted by them. We'll visit that later. So I'll move my units back here. I paid 1 to move, and let's go ahead and just move the chomper here to this power zone. Then I'll pay another 1, and I'll move this Destructomite. He has a move of 6, and remember I can always move 1 diagonal, so I'll take 1, 2, 3, 4, and he'll sit on that neutral spawn point. I'll pay another 1 to move, and let's get this Scorcher here by this building. There's 1. I'll pay another 1 to move, and I'll move this Explodahawk. Has a movement of 6. Now I can move up to 6. I can move 1, 2, 3. It doesn't matter. If I pay 1, I can move the maximum of the printed number there. So I'll move. How about 3? 1, 2, 3, and then I'll pay 1 more to move the Scorcher up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just advance him a little bit. Now something else we'll want to notice on this map is the terrain, and you'll see it here, and it's in the bottom on the bottom of your battle map. And there's different types of terrain. You'll see rocks here, you see the bushes here, and then you see the water here. Now those represent the 3 types of terrain that we have. We have impassable terrain, which you'll notice on the bottom of the battle map is symbolized by the mountains rising up, and it has the whatever on the map is impassable will be pictured there. So you see the water pictured, so this water is impassable. My units cannot move over it unless otherwise deemed by abilities. Then we have the rocks. This is rough terrain, and what rough terrain is something that when you're moving through it, you count 2 spaces instead of 1. For instance, let's say I didn't move this chomper to the power zone, and instead I wanted to move him over here. Now, starting from this position, he would move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's because this is rough terrain. That's all that denotes. Now you'll see on the far right we have something that is rough terrain, but it also has this tree icon, and these are going to be the bushes. Now not only do you pay 2 to move through them, but if you're in those areas, then you get what's known as cover, and that'll come in later on the attacks. But just realize that if you're in these spaces, you're going to be harder to hit, so it might be a good idea to get your units in there. I've spawned all the units that I want to spawn during my spawn phase. and I have moved all the units that I want to move during my movement phase. Now you notice that I'm out of action dice, so I can't do anything else this turn. But just note that there are 2 more phases. One is the attack phase, in which I would attack my opponent, and one is the push phase, in which I could take any leftover dice in my unit pool and move them over to my monster pool. Now, these phases aren't applicable to me right now, so we'll cover them later in the game whenever they are. But Dylan, it's your turn.
Alright. So I'm going to go ahead and spawn these guys. Put one there.
You can pay for that.
And I'm going to pay 1 action dice for that. Thank you, Steven. And I'll spawn this guy here. Pay 1 action die. Spawn this guy here. Pay an action die. And I will spawn this guy here. And pay an action die. Now, Steven, I have a question for you. I'm a little new to this Monsterpocalypse business.
What's that, Dylan?
I have this guy. Now, I'm playing with Sky Sentinel. Sky Sentinel is the guard faction. That's kind of like his group of buddies, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, all of these guys are also guard. This guy is the Martian Menace.
Yes.
Is it alright if I have him in my force?
Well, sure. That's fine. You can include units from other agendas in your force. There's nothing stopping you from doing that.
However, if you do that, if you do include a unit that is not of your monster's agenda, it would cost you an extra point to spawn that unit.
Okay.
So since it's a 1-cost unit, it would cost 2 to spawn.
So if I was to spawn him here, I would have to pay 2.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, I will now start my movement phase. And I'm going to pay 1 action die to move this rocket chopper. Here are his legal moves. And I will move him here.
Now you'll notice that Dylan's unit moved through what would be 2 squares of rough terrain. But a lot of units have abilities, and as we've seen previously and talked about a little bit, this unit in particular has flight. It's a very, very common ability on a lot of units, and what flight says is that all terrain is considered open terrain. So he wouldn't take any penalty for moving through this because all of it is considered open to this unit. However, because it's open, if he were sitting in any of these squares, he would generally not get cover. That's barring any abilities granted by other units, but overall, he would not get cover from any of these spaces. So that's something we wanted to clarify. Also notice that whenever Dylan is spending an action die, he's moving it from his unit pool to his monster pool.
Thank you, Steven. Now I will go ahead and pay 1 action die, put it over in the monster pool, and move this rocket chopper. Here are his legal moves. And I will just move him there. Now I will go ahead and move this guy, pay my action die, put it in the monster pool, and here are his legal moves. And he's just going to go right there. And lastly, I'll just move this guy up a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Which put him in the negative zone.
The reason why I can't put that guy on the negative zone, Steven, is units with flight, unless otherwise noted, cannot hold objective spaces.
Alright, it's good to know.
It is. It's sad.
So, is this all you want to do? Any attacks?
Sadly, I am out of action dice, so I cannot make an attack. So I am going to be done with my phase here.
Alright. Now you'll notice that Dylan technically had a attack phase left and a push phase, but just like me, and as sometimes happens in the beginning of the game, he used all his action die on the first 2 phases, and so he didn't have any left over for the other 2. So he didn't use his attack phase or his push phase, and I didn't use mine, and we'll cover that in subsequent turns. Alright, so Dylan has passed the turn to me, and before I take any activation...